Hello, this is a continuation of my summary of Alistair Parker's The Second World War, this one dealing with Japanese intentions and Pearl Harbor. It comes from Chapter 6, Japanese Victories and Disappointments, from December 1941 to August 1942. So for Parker, in retrospect at least, it was certain that the United States, the British Empire, and the Soviet Union would defeat Germany eventually, if all of them went on fighting long enough. The defeat of Japan would be a lesser problem once Germany had been disposed of, especially as the Soviet Union joined the United States and Britain against Japan. If the Allies stayed together, they must win. That's Parker's statement. The effort and length of time to secure victory depended on mostly how much of the world Germany and Japan could conquer before they were halted. Three great campaigns determined the results. The amphibious operations of the Japanese in the Pacific and Southeast Asia, the German land offensive against the Soviet Union, and the German submarine campaign against Britain. The present video will quickly summarize Japanese operations in the Pacific and Southeast Asia during the first period of the war. It will cover Japanese military strengths, American and British forces, Japanese objectives, Japanese naval strategy, the lack of American preparedness, and briefly the presence of the Royal Navy. So, Japanese military strength. In December 1941, the Japanese Navy had in service 10 battleships, including the Yamato, just added that month, far larger and more powerful than any American or British ship at the time, 10 aircraft carriers, 6 carrying up to 72 aircraft, and 4 smaller ones with less than 35 planes each, 8 heavy cruisers and 18 light cruisers, 113 destroyers, 63 submarines. The Japanese Army, for its part, had 51 divisions, with a normal establishment, each with a normal establishment of about 18,000 men. Most of these divisions were in the home islands, Manchuria, or China. Only 11 were used in the attacks on the Americans, British, and Dutch. The Japanese Navy had about 1,000 first-line combat aircraft, half of them land-based, also about 600 reconnaissance aircraft. For its part, the Japanese Army had about 1,500 first-line aircraft, but less than half of these were made available for the new war. That's the one beyond China. As to American British land and air forces, the Americans had about 35,000 men in the Philippines, supported by 100,000 Filipinos with approximately 250 aircraft. It also had 45,000 men in Hawaii with about 130 aircraft. The British had 3 divisions in Malaya and Singapore, 1 division of locally raised troops in Burma, supported by a few units from the Indian Army, a combat strength of about 12,000 men in Hong Kong, various other tiny garrisons, including 1 Indian battalion in British Borneo, and the RAF had 246 aircraft in Malaya, but most of these were outdated. Japan's objective was to seize a large, economically self-sufficient area and establish a defensive perimeter around it. The Japanese expected that attacks against this defended area would be so difficult that the Americans and British will to fight would eventually diminish so much that they would accept the Japanese new order in East Asia. Hong Kong, Malaya, Singapore, the Philippines, the Dutch East Indies, Siam, Burma, the Nicobar and Andaman Islands, Australia and New Guinea, the Bismarck Islands with Rabaul, the Gilbert Islands, Guam, and Wake Islands were all to be captured in the opening months of the war. To accomplish these conquests, it was necessary to establish Japan's absolute command of the adjoining seas. As both the British and the Dutch navies were weak in the region, the only major threat to Japanese ambitions was the American Pacific Fleet, based at Pearl Harbor. It had 8 battleships, 3 aircraft carriers, 12 heavy cruisers, and 9 light cruisers. The original idea was to wait for the American fleet to move into Japanese waters, weaken it with destroyer and submarine attacks, and then fight a decisive fleet action at a time and place chosen by the Japanese. But the projected Japanese rapid conquests depended on Japanese invasion fleets, and these could not safely go to sea until the American Pacific Fleet had been put out of action. Therefore, Admiral Yamamoto's proposal of a surprise air attack on the American war fleet moored at Pearl Harbor launched from Japanese carriers. This was a risky idea and depended on total surprise. Hence, the Japanese declaration of war was intended to be delivered only 25 minutes before the attack began, but decoding delays meant it was only delivered after it. The attack could have been detected well in advance by the Americans if the commanders at Pearl Harbor had set up routine long-range air reconnaissance patrols, but they haven't. There were warnings, however. An unidentified midget submarine was detected 4 hours before the airstrike, and the submarine was sunk. Army radar provided a 50-minute warning of approaching aircraft, but the submarine report to the Naval Commander-in-Chief arrived at least 30 minutes before the attack, but led to no action, and the radar report never reached him. The attack was so extremely daring and totally unexpected, and any evidence that it was imminent was totally disregarded. Within half an hour, the American battle fleet had been put out of action, and the Japanese were the masters of the Western Pacific. A complete victory had been attained. But its full impact was only temporary. 3 of the damaged battleships were soon repaired. 3 more were eventually able to rejoin the fleet. 2 heavy and 4 light cruisers were unscathed, or only lightly damaged, as were 37 destroyers. Moreover, 1 battleship, the 3 aircraft carriers, 12 cruisers, and 18 destroyers were not in port. As to the Royal Navy, at the outbreak of the war in the Far East, the British only had 6 out of 15 capital ships immediately serviceable. With the threat from the new German battleship Tirpitz and Italian battleship strength, it meant that it was not possible to build up a substantial East Asian fleet until other ships had been repaired and refitted. 2 capital ships, the Prince of Wales and the Repulse, had been dispatched to Singapore, and a new aircraft was going to join them, but suffered accidental damage. The British Admiral was well aware of the danger of Japanese air attack, but sailed to intercept the Japanese landings in Malaya. Both the Prince of Wales and Repulse were sunk in a Japanese aerial torpedo and bomb attack. That's all I'm going to say for the moment. Many thanks to you for listening, and particular thanks to my patrons for their kind support and encouragement, without which I wouldn't be able to make these videos. If you want to support my channel, you're very welcome to do so. Please do like, comment and share on the videos. Subscribe if you want to be notified of future videos. I'll give Patreon and, for the moment, PayPal links below if you want to provide practical support. And next week we'll complete this chapter with discussing Japanese conquests up to the Battle of Midway. Have a good day.